It's time to install the servos, and instead of doing my usual and going with the 5646 WP, I'm going to use the same servo, a 5646, but not the waterproof version, simply just because I don't want a big blue servo mounted on the front of my vehicle. I'm going to do my own little bit of light waterproofing. I'll go over it briefly here. It's not going to be too extensive. I'm going to go ahead and get these servos open and start working on it.
Team Baxter.
I'm approaching this servo a little bit differently. Normally I run a waterproof servo and I never have to deal with it, and when I do run a non-waterproof servo, I just tend to run a little bit of grease underneath this output shaft where the horn attaches. Put a little bit of silicone, like dry silicone here around the wires to kind of seal that up a little bit. But what happens is over time the silicone starts to peel away, and what I get is a possible leak. So I'm gonna do something a little bit different this time. I'm gonna try this dielectric grease. This has been recommended to me by a couple of guys. They said they've used it with no problems. I'm going to take the bottom of this case and apply a thin layer of grease around this lip on the bottom of the case. I'm also going to apply it around the output where the wires come out of the box very heavily. I'm going to pull this little rubber gasket down and apply this grease pretty heavily here. That top and bottom. I'm also going to try to push a little bit up in that gasket. Just try to squeeze a little bit in there so that when I slide this back down over these wires, it kind of starts to gush up like so. So now I've got a fat little deposit of that grease behind the gasket a little bit. A lot of guys tell me to cover that board, and from my standpoint, if I'm getting all of the access points, I shouldn't need to cover this board. This is a process that I'm taking. I'm willing to take the risk of losing my servo. I don't want anybody to do any of this and say that you saw me do it and it was okay, because I'm just trying this out myself. It should be okay due to the fact that I normally never even do this. I normally just run a little bit of grease around it, but I'm gonna try something different this time. Anyway, I added a little bit of grease on the lip of the box where this gasket is going to sit back down. Go ahead and push this gasket all the way back down and get everything situated where I need it. Board is loosely sitting right about where I need. And as I said, I'm going to go ahead and run a little bit of grease around this gasket. So you can see I've run this dielectric grease all the way around that bottom of the case. And set that down just for a second and run an extra bit of grease around this recessed area on the gasket. When I compress these two surfaces, I want the grease to shoot out from all directions, ensuring a little bit of a seal since I'm not going to fill it with grease. The grease wasn't expensive. I don't know about filling this hole with this grease. I've been told repeatedly that it'll be okay, but I figure if I get all the access points, then I shouldn't have a problem. So sit that in there, grab this bottom, and I'll place that right on. Push that board in there a little better. Pop that top right down on there. So I got this closed, grease is shooting out all over the place. It's in every crevice. So I can grab my marine grease and I'll pop the top now. I'm not going to do a whole lot with these skiers here. But what I am going to do is run a little bit of grease around this bearing here. See, I got a nice little stack of marine grease up on that bearing. And I'm also going to run the marine grease around this recessed area just like I did in the bottom, so that when I mash this top on there, it squirts out just like the bottom did. That'll theoretically give me a nice seal. Also, just for safety's sake, I'm going to run a small bead around this recessed area on this output shaft. This will come out of the top hole just a little bit. This may not be necessary, but this is something I do. Again, these are all things that I do to my servos. Not sure if it's the right thing, the wrong thing, but I try not to get too much extra grease in there, just so I don't prohibit a little bit of servo movement. Now I'm all greased up. You see it greased around the outside. A little bit of grease around the box. It's a mess right now, but get that cleaned up. Slide the top over. It's a little grease all over the place as you can. This is going to be a mess when it closes, but get that lined up. You see, this goes together and all the grease, extra grease shoots right out of there. So we get this cleaned up and then I'll be right back. So the servo's all done. Got it closed up and cleaned up. You can see the grease coming out of where the servo horn attaches. And before I attach the servo horn, I'll add a ring of marine grease around that to kind of push down on there. To kind of additionally help water to stop going in there. At the bottom around the 4 screws, I added just a dab of silicone sealant, and what I've done is wipe that off with a clean towel, just kind of small additional measure, kind of keep this thing clean. The reason I switched instead of using that silicone through the whole thing like I normally do is that silicone, like I said earlier, kind of builds up around this output point and then ends up cracking as this moves. So this looks a lot cleaner. Hopefully it'll work just as well. So I'm going to do the other one and then we'll start installing these servos onto the chassis. So I mount these servos onto these Lexan servo plates that I made long ago. They are just a simple piece of 080 Lexan cut tough shape, and then I mounted some Axial servo mounts on there. Servo only fits in there one way. Get those screwed on with Traxxas flathead servo screws. Do that on both sides, and then I move on to setting up the ESC.